This is a reading from the Acts of the Apostles. Just to give you context, there's a word in this Areopagus, and I had to look it up myself. It's a place in Athens, a rock, and Paul was a missionary in Athens, and he spoke there. Then Paul stood in front of the Areopagus and said, "Athenians, I see how extremely religious you all are in every way. For as I went through the city and looked carefully at the objects of your worship, I found among them an altar with the inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, he who is sovereign of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by human hands, and isn't served by human hands as though in need of anything, since God is the one who gives to all mortals life and breath and all things. For one ancestor God made all nations to inhabit the whole earth and allotted the times of their existence and the boundaries of the places where they would live, so that they would search for God and perhaps reach out and find the one who is not far from each of us. For in God we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we too are God's offspring. Since we are God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone or an image formed by the art and imagination of mortals. God, who overlooked the times of human ignorance in the past, now commands all people everywhere to reform their lives. For a day has been set when the whole world will be judged in justice, and this judge, who is a human being, has already been appointed. God has given assurance of all this by raising this judge from the dead." For Paul's ability to meet people where they are and inspire them with the Spirit, we give thanks.
Listen for words of faith from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 15 to 21. Jesus continued, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I will ask the one who sent me to give you another advocate to be with you forever. This is the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it is neither sees nor knows her. But you can recognize the Spirit because she abides with you and will be in you. I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. On that day, you will know that I am God, and you in me, and I in you. They who have made my commandments and keep them are those who love me. And those who love me will be loved by my Abba God, and I will love them and reveal myself to them. For the Word in the beginning, for the Word that invites and inspires, for the Word embodied in Jesus and in us, we give thanks."
Oh, what a beautiful space to be able to step into after that glorious talus. I think there are three broad groups that make up this congregation at Pitt Street Uniting Church. There are probably more than three, and there are certainly subgroups, but I think we could say there are three basic groups. Not that they're divisions that separate in any way, because I think we do genuinely love each other. I think that is a very strong quality that we have with us. And despite our flaws and our trespasses, we accept each other. And we draw everyone into a community of love. The divisions are more a matter of perspective. Each group, and of course each individual, brings a different way of seeing and responding to things that happen in the life of the church. So the first group I identify is made up of people who have remained faithful throughout their lives. Their theology, their understanding may have evolved radically. There may have been times of doubt and struggle, but the thread of faith has remained unbroken. The second group is made up of those who were brought up in the church and maybe had strong commitments and a powerful experience in their younger years, but then dropped out, rejecting the church and even all things metaphysical, but then rediscovered the Spirit, the deeper essence of the Christian path. Then there are those who have come with no background in religion or faith, but have been touched on some level by something authentic and meaningful in our gatherings. People searching for something deeper, having, as Wordsworth says, intimations of immortality, a sense of something beyond the physical. This group often bring an enthusiasm for spiritual experience and openness beyond traditional teaching. It's great to have opportunities to share these perspectives in discussion, and undoubtedly our background affects our attitude to various things, like clapping in church. Perhaps we hear things differently, and perhaps we want to hear different things. That's each of the groups. I'm making an assumption here that no matter our background, no matter how we find ourselves here today, we want to go deeper. We may articulate it in different ways, deeper into the experiences of life, deeper into connection with Spirit, deeper into understanding ourselves and how we relate to the wider world. When Jesus says, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments," I balk a bit at commandments. I resist being commanded. But I realise he is speaking in a certain context where people were conditioned into meticulously following rules. But what Jesus offers is not a set of rules. He is giving a general principle to always act out of love, to find the source of love within and respond to everyone, even enemies, out of love, with compassion and selflessness. This is the principle Christ demonstrated in his own life and death. For me, this is the heart of the Christian gospel. It's an ideal, though, few can fulfill. So we need to strive to develop, refine ourself, transform our shadow, our inner selfish dark side. It's a life's work, but we are guaranteed a helper in the Holy Spirit. This leads me on to the main focus of this reflection: sensing the Spirit. A theme emerging out of one of my favourite stories from the book of Acts. Paul's famous preaching to the wise elders of Athens who met from ancient times on the Areopagus hill. Paul develops his argument to the intellectuals, the philosophers, giving the big picture of human diversity. Wherever they are, no matter ethnicity or culture, people are searching for God, groping and perhaps finding God. As he says, though indeed God is not far from each one of us. Then we hear the oft-repeated words that are really the key point of this reflection. In God, we live and move and have our being. Before I explore this main theme, I'm going to ask your indulgence to go off at a tangent. At the end of the passage that Vivian read today is another verse, verse 32, that talks about people who were converted by Paul's preaching. One of the characters who's fascinated me for many years is Dionysius the Areopagite. I love the musical quality of that name. He is regarded as a saint in the Greek Orthodox faith. It's believed he came out of the Greek mystery tradition and established a Christian mystery school in Athens. Now, in the early 500s of the Common Era, extensive writings purporting to be by Dionysius appeared. Now, last week I was in Taiwan and went to the National Palace Museum. There was an exhibition from the Vatican Library of sacred texts. And one of the first exhibits I was drawn to was a beautifully bound volume of Dionysius the Areopagite, translated into Latin. This experience of synchronicity impelled me to mention him today, although I tried very hard to exclude him. I went to Google and checked out some of his content. Now, actually, some years ago, I wrote an article for the Chronicle that was somewhat about Dionysius the Areopagite and how that is actually the origin, I'll talk about it later, of the name Sydney. But that's quite complicated and I don't want to go into it now. So anyway, I looked up some of his writings and I found a description of his process that he describes as mystic contemplation. He's known for his description of our interaction with angels. And he says we all have our own individual angel. And this is the origin of the idea of a guardian angel. So from Paul's teaching, we can infer that the Spirit is all around us, behind all the phenomena of the physical world. God is to be found not only in the realm of ideas and inner feelings, but in the outer world, through all of our senses. My contention is that we can know the God within, but there is also a longing to know the God beyond ourselves. The Spirit within longs to connect with the Spirit in the world around us, and particularly through experiences of nature, through arts, and through other people. The Spirit is the spirit of connection. When we experience the joy of spring and autumn leaves, or the beauty of visual arts, the sound of rushing water and bird song, the inspiration of great music, all the moments when our heart is moved, we are connecting with spirit, and our self is strengthened. On the cover of your liturgy, there is an artwork by a dear friend of mine, and do have a quick look. This friend of mine, Julie Heyman, and she recently had a successful exhibition in Sydney. She's the sort of person who is immediately attractive. She emanates a light-filled presence that draws people to her. At the opening of her exhibition, she gave a surprising talk about her artistic process. She lives on the edge of a national park at Port Macquarie, and she described how when walking in the bush, she sees something that attracts her attention, that invites her to look more closely, like a bird on a branch. And she is overwhelmed by a sense of love. The connection, the inspiration for her art is experienced as love. We could dwell at length on each of the senses. We've mentioned seeing and hearing. Then there's the joy of touch and the tasting of the Spirit in the bread and wine of communion. So that leaves the sense of smell. And that's what I want to focus on now. We all have our own unique experiences of the Spirit through the senses. For me, the exquisite scent of the flowering daphne bush announcing the coming of spring, followed by the sweet scent of lilac, enlivens my senses. And I'll never forget my first visit to Christchurch St Lawrence and getting my first whiff of incense as the thurible passed by. In Taiwan, I was struck by the devotion and reverence of people worshipping in the various temples. I have a powerful image of this woman standing deep in prayer, holding 3 sticks of incense splayed out in her hand. Incense plays an important part there in the human transaction with the spiritual world. Smoke and incense have played an important role across cultures for millennia, from the Aboriginal smoking ceremony, the Hebrew burnt offerings, to the Christian church today. In a way, I'm proposing something a little different. The sense of smell, particularly in nature, as a pathway to the Spirit, as indeed are all the senses. We might say that uplifting experiences, whether in nature, the arts, or community, feed, nourish, expand the soul. And I'm also suggesting perhaps something more than that as well. These positive experiences shape our sense of self. They strengthen our sense of I, our unique individuality. Our responses to connecting with the Spirit shape who we are, our truest spiritual self. At every stage of life, we are having to readjust our sense of who we are. this I who is doing the perceiving. We may be set in our ways, but life, the wider world, is always bumping into us with knocks and shocks, challenging us, challenging who we are and forcing us to evolve, or the opposite, sometimes hardening our set patterns. These times of prayer and worship, experiences of connection with Spirit, in whatever form they take, strengthen our sense of self. How do we see the world? Filled with Spirit or merely dead matter? Where do we live and move and have our being? As the artist Julie Hayman described, the experience of connecting with Spirit in nature is an encounter with love. We love each other, not because we are commanded, but because love is the core of our true self. It's a great truth of the gospel. And we recognise it in others, even when perhaps they don't recognise it in themselves. Amen.